So tonight we're going to continue with the Jewish feast days. And last week we talked about the Feast of Purim, and then this week we're going to talk about Hanukkah. And you kind of know that Hanukkah is always celebrated around Christmas time. So I'm going to tell you how this feast came to be about and what it represents. And starting off, I want to tell you what the word Hanukkah means. Hanukkah is a Hebrew word for a dedication, because they dedicated something, and we're going to get into that story. So it's called the Feast of Dedication. It's also called the Feast of Lights, and it's called Hanukkah. So the origin of when this happened was the intertestamental period, which is the end of the Old Testament, the beginning of the New Testament. Well, there's history that happened in between there, and that's recorded in the Apocrypha. And so what we're going to talk about is the book of Maccabees. We're going to talk about the Maccabean Wars. So the situation at this time was there was a Seleucid king named Antiochus Epiphanes. And he was of the Seleucid dynasty of Syria. And that word Seleucid comes from when Alexander the Great divided his empire into three separate empires. The one who took Syria, his name was Seleucus. So the ones that came after him were called Seleucids. Now his name is Antiochus Epiphanes, or Antiochus the Fourth. This word Antioch comes from this Seleucus, this first emperor of this region, Assyria. His father was named Antioch. So he made the city of Antioch, he created that to be the capital of Syria. Now we know Antioch from the New Testament. The spreading of the church, Antioch was very involved with that, but that's where that name came from. So the Syrians occupied Palestine from 280 BC to 63 BC. And in 63 BC, the Roman conqueror Pompey took over the whole province of Syria. So then Palestine became under Roman rule, which we know that in Jesus' time, it was all under Roman rule, right? Well, I'm just kind of giving you the history there. Well, Antiochus the Fourth was like so cruel. He was known as the madman. He was a very cruel ruler. At that time in Jerusalem, there was a priest who was a very honorable, good man, and his name was Onias. And he served God. Well, Antiochus the Fourth just decided, I want to set my own priests. So he did. And it ended up being a competition between three brothers, Jason, Menelaus, and Lysimachus. They were all competing for this position. These brothers hated each other. And they were all pagans. They had no desire to serve God. They wanted the position for power, for authority, for honor, and for money, because the temple was very wealthy. There was a lot of gold and silver in there that, people were always giving tithes, and different kings would contribute to the temple. So it was very wealthy. So they really wanted this position. So after they had been fighting over this, and one of those three brothers were having the position of high priest, finally Antiochus IV sends an army in, and he thinks, I'm just going to take all of the artifacts and all of the whatever's left out of that temple, I'm going to take it all. So he sent an army in there, and he said, if anyone gets in your way, you kill him. Well, somebody got in his way, and he ends up killing 40,000 Jews, and 45,000 are captured and sold as slaves. But this isn't the rebellion. This isn't it. That hasn't happened yet. And so he ends up taking the menorah. The menorah is a Jewish word for the candlestick, which is in the temple. He took the menorah, the altar of golden incense, the table of showbread. They even stripped the gold off of the walls. I mean, he took everything. And then he desecrated that temple and offered a pig on the altar of sacrifice. So the whole place was defiled. He desecrated the temple. And in Daniel 11:13, it talks about the abomination of desolation. This is a first fulfillment of that. Okay, the second fulfillment of the abomination of desolation, the next abomination in the temple, is when Antichrist stands in the rebuilt temple and claims that he is God. That's the second fulfillment of the abomination of desolation in Daniel 11:31. Antiochus wants to unite his empire. And it's not that he really hates Jews. He just doesn't want this division that some of the people are worshiping different. You know, they have a different culture. They have different laws. And he just wants everyone to be Greek. He wants them to be on the same plane. He feels like his kingdom is going to be more prosperous. So he makes some laws. And what he's basically doing is outlawing Judaism. And the first law he made was that they could not celebrate the Sabbath. They were forced to work on the Sabbath. So this is all against the Mosaic law. The second law he made was that they could not abide by the dietary laws. They would be forced to eat food that was against the Mosaic law. And then they said no circumcision. Well, let me tell you something. After a couple of generations, there wouldn't be any more Jews when they're not keeping the laws, right? Well, I want to tell you the bigger plan. Satan was in control here with Antiochus the Fourth. Here he's wiped out the temple. Now he's trying to erase the Jewish culture. And he knows that Jesus is going to come from the Jews and that Jesus is going to be walking in that temple. So he's trying to wipe it all out because Messiah is coming in 150 years, and he wanted to prevent that. He tried several times to prevent Christ from coming and being successful, like with his temptations in the wilderness. Well, some of the Jews said, okay, we'll go along with it, because they just didn't want to fight, you know. But some didn't. They said, we're going to fight to the death. We believe in God. We believe in his laws that he gave us, and we will fight for our freedom or we will die. That was their attitude, and that was the beginning of the Maccabean War. But the Maccabean War did not start in Jerusalem. It started in an area called Modin. And there was a priest there named Mattathias. And another army came from Antiochus the Fourth, and they built an altar there in this town of Modin, and they told this priest to sacrifice a pig on that altar. He wouldn't do it. So another Jew stepped up and said, I'll do it. Well, Mattathias took a sword and killed that guy. Wow. Once he did that, guess what? That was the start of the revolt. All of the Jews came behind him, and they started fighting that army, and they killed him. Good. It was freedom or death. Mattathias died. He had a son named Judas Maccabeus. Judas Maccabee. Now, Maccabee was not his last name. Maccabee is an acronym, and it's put together of several words that mean, who is like you in the Lord's name? That's what Maccabee means. So they fought for 3 years, and, you know, it was win here, lose there, blah, blah. But God stepped in and won this war for them. He gave Antiochus the Fourth a disease of his bowels that was deadly. And, you know, when you're facing death, all of a sudden, all the things in this world don't matter that much to you. And he realized that this was from God. And so he stopped the war. He gave the Jews their freedom. And so the Maccabees went into Jerusalem and went into the temple, and they took out all the idols that had been put in there, and they built new furnishings. But they didn't build them out of gold. They built them out of probably like brass, because they wanted to start the services again. They wanted to start their sacrifices again, and all the things, the showbread. They wanted to start all that again. So what ends up happening is that Antiochus returns all of the artifacts, all the gold, the candelabra, the golden altar of incense, the showbread, all of the pans, all the dishes, everything that they had taken, he returned it all to them. So the Jews cleansed the temple before they put any furnishings in. They cleansed it and they rededicated it to the God of Israel. And that name, that rededication, it was on December 25th, and that is Hanukkah. Hanukkah means dedication. So that happened on December 25th. But now we're going to talk about a little bit more that happened. And this is why it's called the Feast of Lights. Once they got all of their artifacts in there, you have to light the candelabra with olive oil. And they only had one flask. It may have been that they got this from Maccabees. They only had one flask, and when they poured it in the lamp, it was only enough for 1 day. So they went to another area where there were some really good olive trees and started getting the oil out of the olives. But then the process of purifying it for the temple took 8 days. And a miracle happened. On the second day, the lamp was still burning. There was only enough oil for 1 day. And the third, and the fourth, and the fifth, and the sixth, and the seventh, and the eighth. That's why their feast lasts for 8 days. Because God is telling them, I'm with you. I'm still here, and I am for you. And so he did that miracle for them. All Jewish families still celebrate this for several reasons. First of all, because of the battle that God won for them. This is the only time they were ever an independent people. They were a sovereign nation from this time up until 63 BC. And they had their own menorah. Now, the menorah in the temple had 7 candles. What does 7 mean? Complete. Mm-hmm. But the menorah for Hanukkah is different. It has 4 on one side and 4 on the other, and then 1 in the middle. But those 4 and 4 represent the 8 days of that miracle. And the one in the middle, they light it, and then on the first day, they light 1 candle and put that back. Then the second day, they light another candle. So that's why 8 days, every day they light another candle. And it's a really joyous celebration for them because they remember how God gave them their own sovereignty and helped them win a battle against a huge nation, a huge empire. They won that. And God won it for them. Now I want to jump forward to the New Testament to John 10. And this is about Jesus. And this is John 10:22. And it was at Jerusalem, the Feast of Dedication. And it was winter, because their winter is the same as ours. December 25th. And Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch. So this is what I'm trying to say. Jesus was a Jew. He celebrated this. This was a big deal for him too. He was probably the one making the miracles happen. So he celebrated Hanukkah in that temple that the Maccabees had cleansed and rededicated. And that's my message.